Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking at the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela, based on the excerpts you sent from Nelson Mandela, a biography. I
Right.
mean, what a life,
An
right?
incredible figure, a huge impact.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so fascinating for me, is just the impact on South Africa, obviously, but like the world stage too.
Right. And you really can't separate his personal story from the history of South Africa. The two are just so intertwined.
So where do we even begin?
I guess we could start with his early life, his childhood.
Yeah,
Born in 1918 in a rural village in the Transkei region of South Africa. And he grew up really immersed in Xhosa culture,
right.
which played a huge role in shaping his worldview.
So are there any specific examples of how his upbringing, influenced him?
Well, his birth name was Rolihlahla, which actually means troublemaker in Xhosa. And his clan name, Madiba, means reconciler.
Wait, troublemaker and reconciler. That's interesting.
Right. It's like they knew something we didn't.
Yeah, foreshadow.
Foreshadowing. Exactly.
Ah.
He ends up embodying both of those things throughout his life.
He challenged injustice, but also championed unity and forgiveness.
Absolutely. And this tension between those two forces, it's present throughout his whole journey. I mean, he was raised in these very traditional Xhosa ways, but then he was educated in English-style schools.
Right, so he was exposed to Western ideals while also seeing his own culture suppressed.
Exactly. It must have been a very complicated upbringing.
Confusing even.
And then you layer on top of all that the reality of land dispossession happening all around him.
So that's white settlers controlling most of the land.
Yeah. I mean, even Mandela's own father, who was a headman in their village, he was deposed by the British for resisting their authority.
Wow, so these early experiences with injustice, both personal and societal, it's easy to see how they kind of fueled his drive, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this early exposure to injustice kind of planted the seeds.
Right, and then we see how it shaped his political ideology.
Totally. So fast forward a bit to the 1940s. Mandela moves to Johannesburg.
Right.
And Johannesburg at that time was this vibrant city, but also very segregated. And that's where he encountered the full force of apartheid.
So a system designed to maintain white supremacy.
Yes. And it's in Johannesburg where he really starts to get seriously involved with the African National Congress, the ANC.
So he was already exposed to the ANC.
Yeah,
Right?
through Walter Sisulu, his friend and mentor. But in Johannesburg, he becomes much more active. I mean, he participated in protests like the Alexandra bus boycott in 1943.
That's the one where thousands of Africans chose to walk 10 miles to work.
Rather than pay a fare hike. Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
What was it about that particular issue, the fare hike, that you think sparked such a powerful response?
I think it was more than just the fare. It was about the daily indignities, the injustices Black South Africans faced under apartheid.
It's just a feeling of being treated like second-class citizens.
Yeah, exactly. And then a few years later, in 1946, there's this massive mine workers strike.
This is where black miners are protesting their abysmal working conditions.
Right, and unfair wages compared to their white counterparts. These events, witnessing that level of exploitation firsthand, must have been a real turning point for Mandela.
Yeah, I imagine it really solidified his commitment to fighting for social justice.
And then things kind of come to a head with the 1948 election. The National Party wins, ushering in the official beginning of the apartheid era.
A huge turning point, I imagine.
The National Party codified racial segregation and discrimination into law, affecting literally every aspect of life for Black South Africans. They had the Population Registration Act, the Group Areas Act, and the Pass Laws.
So apartheid became this inescapable web of control.
It did. And in response to this, Mandela and the ANC, they started to shift their strategy a little bit. There was a growing sense within the ANC that peaceful protest alone wasn't enough.
So is this where things start to get a bit more radical?
Well, not necessarily violent, at least not yet. But within the ANC, the Youth League in particular, they start to advocate for a more assertive approach to challenging apartheid.
And Mandela was a key figure in the Youth League, right?
He was. They wanted to disrupt the system more directly through boycotts, strikes, acts of defiance, and this led to the 1952 Defiance Campaign.
Right, where thousands of people deliberately violated apartheid laws.
Exactly. Challenging segregation in public spaces, refusing to carry passes, entering whites-only areas. It was a direct challenge to the legitimacy of apartheid law.
And I bet the government was none too pleased about that.
They weren't. Mandela was arrested during the campaign, but his arrest never seemed to deter him.
Yeah, it sounds like they fueled his determination.
It's a recurring theme in his life. So a few years later, in 1955, you have the adoption of the Freedom Charter.
which outlined principles for a just and equal society in South Africa.
Exactly. The Congress of the People, this gathering of activists from all different backgrounds, they came together to envision a democratic future for their country, and the Freedom Charter was the result.
Equality before the law, equal rights for all, redistribution of land.
These were radical ideas for the time, considering the political climate,
It sounds like a direct challenge to the entire system of apartheid.
and the government responded accordingly. In 1956, Mandela, along with 155 other activists, were arrested and charged with high treason.
This was the start of the treason trial.
Right, which dragged on for years. And all of this is happening as Mandela's personal life is also undergoing some major changes. He gets divorced from his first wife, Evelyn, and meets a young social worker named Winnie Madikizela.
Winnie Mandela, she became a very powerful figure in her own right.
She did. She was incredibly strong, incredibly resilient.
I mean, enduring immense hardship because of her activism.
Yeah. Her and Mandela, they were real partners in the struggle, united by their shared passion for justice.
It sounds like their relationship was both romantic and deeply intertwined with the fight against apartheid.
Yes, they faced constant harassment. Their time together was limited. It was definitely a love story set against the backdrop of a revolution. And then, in 1960, South Africa experienced a tragedy that would change the course of the struggle. The Sharpeville Massacre,
Oh yeah, where police opened fire on a peaceful protest.
killing 69 people and injuring hundreds more. It was a horrific act of violence.
And a major turning point.
Yeah, it shook the world. After Sharpeville, the ANC, which had always been committed to nonviolent resistance, they made the difficult decision to form Umkhonto we Sizwe.
Also known as MK, the armed wing of the ANC.
Right. The Sharpeville Massacre really made it clear that peaceful protest alone wasn't going to be enough to dismantle apartheid.
So this is the ANC taking up arms against the apartheid regime.
Yeah, and Mandela was right at the center of this shift. He went underground, traveling across the country, organizing resistance, even receiving military training abroad. He became known as the Black Pimpernel because he was constantly evading capture.
Living a dangerous life.
Very dangerous, but of course, it couldn't last forever.
Right.
In 1962, Mandela was arrested.
And that led to the Rivonia trial.
In 1964, he was sentenced to life in prison.
And sent to Robben Island.
It was a devastating blow to the anti-apartheid movement, but it didn't break Mandela's spirit.
So Robben Island, this infamous prison, it becomes the next chapter in his story.
Yeah, it was meant to isolate and crush him, but it ended up becoming a crucible where his leadership was further forged.
That seems like a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
From Mandela's childhood to his imprisonment on Robben Island. But this is just the beginning of his story.
There's so much more to come.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore his years on Robben Island, the growing international pressure against apartheid, and ultimately his long walk to freedom.
It's an incredible story of resilience and hope.
It really is. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela.
I can't wait to delve into the rest of his story.
Yeah, it's going to be
It
fascinating.
really is. Mandela's life is just full of these incredible twists and turns.
And his impact, I mean, it's still felt today.
Absolutely. He left an indelible mark on the world.
When we left off, Mandela had just been imprisoned on Robben Island. What was life actually like for him there?
Oh, man, it was brutal. A tiny cell, barely any space to move around.
Right. I mean, we've all seen the pictures.
Yeah, and on top of that, forced labor in a limestone quarry, the glare from that permanently damaged his eyesight.
You know, it's hard to imagine enduring even a day under those conditions, let alone decades.
Absolutely. But Mandela, he didn't just survive. He found ways to resist, to lead, even within the confines of prison.
So he didn't let the system break him. He actively fought against it.
Exactly. He rallied his fellow prisoners. They demanded better conditions. They used their time in the quarry to discuss politics, history, philosophy. They turned Robben Island into what they called the University of the Struggle.
That's incredible. So it wasn't just about physical survival, but mental and political resilience as well.
Absolutely. They developed ingenious ways to communicate, smuggling messages out in matchboxes or using coded language during visits. Mandela knew that hope was their most powerful weapon.
It's remarkable, that ability to find hope in such a bleak situation. And speaking of hope, Winnie's visits must have been a lifeline for him during those years.
Oh, absolutely. Winnie, she was a force to be reckoned with. While Mandela was physically imprisoned, she became a powerful voice for the anti-apartheid movement on the outside, endured harassment, detention, even banishment, but never wavered in her commitment.
Their story is just such a powerful example of love and resilience in the face of oppression.
It really is. It speaks to the interconnectedness of the personal and the political in the struggle against apartheid.
Right, and that struggle was also gaining momentum on the international stage.
Exactly. Boycotts of South African goods, sanctions, divestment campaigns, targeting companies doing business there. The world was putting pressure on the apartheid government.
So South Africa was becoming increasingly isolated.
Yeah, by the 1980s, their economy was really struggling under the weight of those sanctions. It became clear that apartheid wasn't sustainable in the long run.
So did that lead to the government finally considering negotiations with the ANC?
Well, it was complicated, but the government started to realize that any solution would have to involve Mandela. He was the key.
And then in 1990, after 27 years, Mandela was released from prison.
It was a moment of pure joy, not just for South Africans, but for people all over the world who'd been following his story.
What a powerful image, Mandela walking out of prison, a symbol of hope triumphing over despair.
It really was. It signaled the beginning of a new era. But of course, the challenges were far from over.
I mean, going from prisoner to negotiating with those who imprisoned you, trying to reconcile a deeply divided nation,
It was a monumental task.
and one that could have easily descended into chaos and violence.
But Mandela, he believed that revenge wouldn't lead to lasting peace. He chose forgiveness and understanding as the path forward.
Which is what led to the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Exactly. A platform for victims to share their stories, for perpetrators to confess their crimes and seek amnesty. It was groundbreaking, an attempt to heal the wounds of the past and move forward together.
That must have been such a tense and uncertain time. I mean, was there ever a point where it felt like a whole process might collapse?
Oh, absolutely. There were setbacks, threats of violence. It was a constant balancing act.
But ultimately, against all odds, those negotiations were successful.
And in 1994, South Africa held its first multiracial elections.
And Nelson Mandela was elected as the first black president of South Africa.
What a moment. It captured the imagination of the entire world. Here was this man who had been in prison for 27 years, now leading the nation that had once sought to silence him.
So it was a victory not just for Mandela, but for the millions who had fought tirelessly against apartheid.
It was the dawn of a new South Africa. But of course, the work was just beginning. Mandela inherited a country deeply scarred by apartheid. He had to deal with the legacy of injustice, the economic disparities.
And the devastating HIV/AIDS epidemic, it was a lot to take on.
It was. He had to balance the demands for social justice with the need to maintain economic stability. And through it all, he remained a beacon of hope, a symbol of the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity.
It's truly remarkable what he accomplished. But after just one term, he decided to step down from the presidency.
Yes, in 1999, he decided to retire from active politics.
Was that decision related to the challenges he was facing? I mean, was it just too much?
Well, it was a combination of things. He was getting older, the demands of leading a nation in transition were immense, but I think he also understood the importance of setting a precedent for democratic transitions of power.
So even in stepping down, he was making a statement about the future of his nation.
Exactly. He transitioned from an active political role to becoming this global advocate for peace, justice, equality. He worked tirelessly to raise awareness about HIV/AIDS, campaigned against poverty, promoted education.
His impact extended far beyond the borders of South Africa.
Oh, absolutely. He became a moral leader for the entire world.
It's an inspiring legacy.
Yeah.
As we reflect on his journey, what stands out to you the most?
It's just incredible. Even after experiencing so much brutality under apartheid, Mandela chose forgiveness and reconciliation as the path forward for South Africa.
I know it's hard to fathom, right? It had been so easy to choose anger and retribution.
Exactly.
But he consistently advocated for a path that led to healing and unity.
He really did.
So what do you think motivated that approach?
I think Mandela had a deep understanding of human nature, He recognized that revenge wouldn't really break the cycle of violence. He really believed that true peace, true healing could only come through understanding, through forgiveness, and through reconciliation.
Yeah, and that philosophy, I mean, that was really at the heart of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Absolutely. The TRC, it was all about acknowledging the past, seeking forgiveness, and trying to move forward together.
It was such a such a bold concept.
Yeah.
But did it actually resonate with South Africans?
Well, the TRC was powerful, incredibly powerful, but also, imperfect. It allowed victims to share their stories, to have their pain acknowledged. And at the same time, it offered perpetrators a chance to confess their actions and seek amnesty.
It sounds like a very, very complex process, both logistically and emotionally.
Oh, it definitely was. Balancing the needs of victims with the desire for national healing, that's not easy.
Yeah. Were there any criticisms of this approach?
Oh, sure. Some argued that amnesty basically equated to impunity, that true justice required punishment for the crimes committed under apartheid. Others felt that it didn't go far enough in addressing the systemic issues that allowed apartheid to thrive for so long.
It sounds like there were just no easy answers when it came to reconciling such a painful and divided past.
There really weren't.
But even with those criticisms, I mean, Mandela's focus on forgiveness, on understanding, it feels so important.
It was a radical approach, and its legacy is still debated today. But but I think it's crucial to remember that Mandela wasn't just an idealist, he was also a pragmatist.
So he wasn't just focused on lofty ideals, but also on the practical realities of governing a complex and divided nation.
Exactly. He understood the need to compromise, to build alliances, to make tough decisions, dismantling apartheid and building a new South Africa. That wasn't going to happen overnight. It required patience, it required strategy, and it required a willingness to work with those who had once been adversaries.
Did that pragmatism also influence his approach to economic policy?
Absolutely. Mandela knew that radical economic shifts could destabilize the country. So he opted for a more gradual approach, focused on building a strong economy that could benefit all South Africans.
It sounds like he was walking a tightrope, trying to meet the demands for social justice while also ensuring economic stability.
Yeah, it was a delicate balancing act for sure.
And did he face any pushback for that approach?
Oh, of course. Some felt that his approach was too conciliatory, that he wasn't aggressive enough in addressing the economic disparities created by apartheid. Others worried that he was going to alienate investors and hinder economic growth.
So even with his immense popularity, his moral authority, Mandela still had to navigate some really complex political and economic realities.
He did. He was constantly juggling competing priorities,
Right.
and all while maintaining his role as this global symbol of hope and
And
inspiration.
he used that platform, that global platform, to really advocate for change, right?
He did. He used his international stature to attract investment, to promote South Africa as this beacon of democracy, and to advocate for peace and human rights around the world.
It's truly amazing, everything he accomplished, especially in the face of such adversity. His story is a testament to the power of the human spirit. As we wrap up our deep dive into the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela, is there a final thought you want to leave our listener with?
I think Mandela's story, it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope can triumph over despair. And he showed the world that forgiveness and reconciliation, while incredibly difficult, are essential for building a better future. His life is a testament to the power of courage, to the power of perseverance, and to a deep, unwavering commitment to justice. It's a legacy that continues to inspire us today.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. It's a story that I think continues to resonate, offering valuable lessons about leadership, about resilience, and about the enduring power of the human spirit.